There's a hospital where mirrors don't just reflect you, they remember you. The screams you hid, the pain you buried. And if you stare too long, your reflection might not give you back. This is the story of Evelyn and the haunted ward that never forgot her. The cold fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above Nurse Evelyn as she clocked in for her night shift at St. Augustine Hospital. It was her third night in a row, and although she was used to the eerie silence of the overnight hours, something felt different tonight, heavier, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. St. Augustine was one of the oldest hospitals in the city, built during the early 1900s. While much of it had been renovated, certain wings remained untouched, abandoned halls with chipped paint, flickering lights, and a silence so dense it seemed to swallow sound. One of those was Wing C, closed after a fire in 1987. No one ever went there. It was blocked off, locked, and left to decay. But as Evelyn passed the nurse's station on the third floor, she noticed something odd. The security feed showed movement in Wing C. She blinked, leaned closer to the screen. There, just a flicker, a shadow shifting past the broken glass door. She glanced at her colleague Marcus, who was busy dozing off at the back with earbuds in. Typical. Curious but cautious, Evelyn grabbed her flashlight and the old master key ring that hung on the hook beside the meds cabinet. She walked down the hallway, her shoes echoing softly on the linoleum floor. The air grew colder the closer she got to Wing C, and with every step, her stomach churned. Still she pressed on. The old door creaked open with a groan that sounded too human. Dust exploded into the air as Evelyn stepped inside. The wing was dark, save for her flashlight beam, which danced across empty beds and shattered monitors. She could hear the distant beep of a heart monitor, but there was no power in this section. No electricity. That alone made her freeze. Then she saw it. Down the hallway, a patient in a hospital gown stood barefoot, staring directly at her. His eyes glowed unnaturally in the dark. His mouth hung open as if screaming in silence. But no sound came. "Sir? You're not supposed to be here," Evelyn called out, her voice trembling. The man didn't move. He didn't blink. But as Evelyn took a cautious step forward, the lights flickered, and he was gone. Just like that. She turned around to leave, heart racing, but the hallway behind her was no longer the one she entered. The walls were crumbling, and the floor beneath her feet was cracked and blackened by fire. She was no longer in the present. This was the hospital as it had been during the blaze. And then the screaming began. Dozens of voices, men, women, children, screaming in agony. Flames licked the edges of her vision. She covered her ears, trying to shut it out, but the sound pierced through her skull like knives. Suddenly, hands grabbed her from behind. She turned, but there was no one there. Only the echo of laughter, dry and lifeless. She ran. Bursting through the door, Evelyn collapsed in the hallway, gasping for air. The hospital looked normal again. Plain. Quiet. But when she looked back at the security monitor, Wing C was pitch black. No movement. Except, the figure was there again. Closer this time. Watching. Waiting. After the chilling encounter in Wing C, Evelyn swore to herself she wouldn't speak of it. She tried to dismiss what happened as stress, hallucination, or a side effect of the long shifts. But each time she passed the hallway leading to Wing C, a chill traveled up her spine. And each time she checked the security feed, the figure was still there, closer than before. The hospital administration ignored her concerns. "There's no power in that wing," they insisted. "The cameras don't even work there anymore. Must be a glitch." But the glitch seemed to grow more vivid each night. Evelyn needed answers. She decided to dig into the hospital's archives. The old record room was tucked away in the sub-basement, a place few people visited since most files had been digitized. The air was damp, the walls lined with old filing cabinets covered in dust and cobwebs. The yellowed lights flickered above as she stepped inside with her flashlight and a notepad. She began searching under Wing C, pulling out file after file. Most documents were standard reports, maintenance issues, renovation delays, but then she found it, a thick folder marked Wing C Incident Report 1987. As she opened the file, a brittle newspaper clipping fell to the floor. The headline read, "Hospital Fire Kills 23 in Mysterious Wing C Blaze." The article described how a fire broke out in the middle of the night under strange circumstances. The sprinkler system failed. Several patients were trapped. Among the victims was a man named Samuel Crane, a psychiatric patient who had been admitted after allegedly killing 3 members of his own family. His file was stapled to the back, marked with large red letters, "Do not transfer, high risk, no contact without security present." Evelyn's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. The last note in the file read, "Patient Crane claimed to see flames that whispered and shadows that showed him the way to freedom. Hours before the fire, he was heard laughing and speaking to someone unseen. After the fire, his body was never recovered." Suddenly, the lights in the record room went out. Total darkness. Evelyn's heart jumped. She fumbled for her flashlight, but the beam was weak, flickering. Then came the sound, a slow dragging of feet across the concrete floor behind her. She turned. Nothing. And yet, the dragging grew louder, closer. She backed toward the door, clutching the folder tightly to her chest. Her flashlight blinked again, then went out completely. In the pitch black, she felt something cold brush against her arm. A whisper followed. "You read my story?" She bolted. Running blindly down the corridor, Evelyn burst through the heavy door into the main hallway. She didn't stop until she reached the nurse's station. She collapsed in a chair, breathless, heart pounding. Marcus looked up, confused. "Evelyn? Where have you been? Your shift ended an hour ago. You've been gone all night." She stared at the clock. 7:05 a.m. But when she entered the record room, it had only been 2:17 a.m. And in her arms, the folder was gone. Only a black handprint remained on her scrubs. Evelyn couldn't shake what had happened. No sleep, no appetite, just the echo of that whisper in the dark. "You read my story." The handprint on her scrub top didn't wash out, and no one believed her. Even Marcus started keeping his distance. But what disturbed Evelyn most was that each night, the figure on the Wing C monitor appeared closer, clearer. She could now make out the pale outline of a face. Long gaunt. Eyes that were nothing but pits of black. And always watching. 3 days passed before something strange occurred on the medical floor. An elderly woman, Mrs. Dorsey, was admitted with a mild infection. She was placed in room 309, a corner room usually reserved for quiet cases. Evelyn was assigned to her that night. Mrs. Dorsey was alert and pleasant, though she complained of the cold. Evelyn adjusted the heater and brought an extra blanket. At 3:12 a.m., the emergency alert from room 309 rang out. Heart monitor flatlined. Evelyn sprinted down the hall. But when she entered, Mrs. Dorsey was sitting upright, eyes wide, trembling. "No. No, not again," she screamed. "He's in the walls. He came through the mirror." Evelyn rushed to her side. "You're okay. You're safe." Mrs. Dorsey clung to her. "He said I saw too much. He said I don't belong here anymore." The next morning, Mrs. Dorsey was transferred to the psychiatric unit. Her vitals were fine, but she refused to speak again. Only cried. Curious and increasingly disturbed, Evelyn went back to room 309 later that day when it was unoccupied. She needed to see what the woman meant about the mirror. It was a standard hospital bathroom mirror, slightly fogged. Evelyn turned off the lights and waited for it to clear. As her own reflection came into focus, something changed. Her reflection didn't move with her. It stayed still, staring straight at her. A grin slowly spread across her reflection's face. Evelyn stumbled backward in horror. Her heart raced. She reached for her flashlight and shone it directly at the mirror, but now there was nothing. Just her normal reflection, frightened, pale, confused. Later that night, Evelyn reported her findings to Dr. Keller, one of the older physicians. He raised an eyebrow. "Room 309, he murmured. "Funny you mention that." "Why?" Evelyn asked. Dr. Keller leaned in. "Back in '87, during the fire, it was used for psychiatric overflow. One of the patients allegedly scratched warnings all over the mirror, said it was a door. After the fire, the mirror was replaced. Twice. But nurses kept reporting reflections that weren't their own." Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. Dr. Keller sighed. "They finally stopped reporting it. It's easier to ignore things here." Before he walked away, he added one last thing. "Do yourself a favor, Evelyn. Stay away from Wing C. And don't look too long into any mirror at night." That evening, she passed room 309 again. Inside, the mirror was covered with words, scratched from the inside. Words that hadn't been there earlier. "He's not in the wing. He's in the glass. Don't reflect him. Don't speak his name." And at the very bottom, Crane. The hospital had always felt alive at night, but now, it pulsed with something sinister. Word had quietly spread among the staff. About Evelyn, about room 309, about something being wrong in Wing C. But no one dared talk openly. Whispers ended in silence. Fear hung in the air like disinfectant. Then came Theo. Theo was a new intern, fresh from medical school, sharp, confident, and full of that bright-eyed curiosity that hadn't yet been dulled by the graveyard shift. He noticed Evelyn one night while reviewing patient charts. Her haggard face and sunken eyes betrayed what she'd been through. "You okay?" he asked gently. "You look like you haven't slept in weeks." She gave him a weak smile. "I haven't." Curious and a bit amused, Theo asked, "So what's the deal with Wing C?" "Everyone says it's haunted." Evelyn froze. "Don't joke about that." "I'm serious. I walked past it on my last round. Thought I saw something through the glass. Looked like a guy. Just standing there." "You did see someone?" Evelyn whispered. Theo laughed nervously, but Evelyn's expression didn't change. "Okay, now you're messing with me. Don't go back there, Theo," she warned. Of course he didn't listen. Later that night, Theo decided to investigate Wing C. He brought his phone, flashlight, and a cocky smirk. "Ghost hunting, hospital edition," he muttered into his phone camera, recording everything. The others thought it was just a TikTok prank. He slipped into the dark corridor, filming the peeling walls, scorched ceiling, and shattered windows. "Welcome to Wing C," he said, "where ghosts punch your time card." Then he saw the door to room C13 slightly ajar. The fire report Evelyn had read mentioned that the fire had started in room C13. With the flashlight in one hand and his phone in the other, Theo pushed the door open. The room was charred black, the floor covered in ash and debris. But the center of the room was untouched, a pristine hospital bed, white sheets neatly made. And on it lay a patient. Eyes open. Theo whispered, "Is this real?" The patient turned his head, slowly, and locked eyes with Theo. His mouth began to open. Theo ran. He didn't stop until he was out of Wing C, heart pounding, lungs burning. He raced to the nurse's station, slamming his hands on the desk. "He's real," he gasped. "There's someone in C13. He moved." Evelyn was there, eyes wide. "You went in, didn't you?" Marcus ran to get help. Security arrived within minutes. They followed Theo back to Wing C. But C13 was empty. No bed. No patient. Only a single thing left behind on the floor. Theo's phone. They retrieved it and reviewed the footage. Everything was there. Until Theo entered the room. Then the screen glitched. Static. And finally, the last clear image. Theo staring into the camera, mouth wide in terror. Behind him, the pale patient grinned from the bed. His eyes were black voids, and across his chest were scratch marks forming a name. Krane. Theo didn't return the next night. He resigned from his residency the following morning, citing psychological distress. He left the city. No one heard from him again. But the video still sits on the hospital's internal network, hidden, unlisted. And sometimes when the night is especially quiet, the monitors flicker on their own, showing room C13, with a patient waiting and watching. Nurse Evelyn had started wearing a crucifix under her scrubs. It wasn't something she normally did, she wasn't particularly religious, but the things she'd seen, the name Crane burned into every strange occurrence, made her feel the need for some kind of protection. Even Marcus, once the skeptic, had stopped joking and avoided Wing C altogether. But the hospital didn't rest. Neither did he. It started with the vents. One night, as Evelyn was making her rounds, she paused outside room 214. A new patient had just been transferred from the ICU, a young man named David who had barely survived a car crash. He was sedated, hooked up to machines in deep recovery. As she checked his vitals, she heard a sound above her. Whispering. She froze. It came from the vent directly overhead. A dry, raspy murmur. Too low to make out the words, but unmistakably human. Evelyn stepped back and held her breath. The room was empty aside from David, and he was unconscious. She grabbed a step stool and got closer to the vent. The whispering stopped. For a few seconds there was only silence, until a voice hissed through. "He's not sleeping." Evelyn staggered back, nearly dropping her chart. David began to stir. His body twitched. His monitor beeped erratically. And then his eyes opened, wide and bloodshot. No, I locked it. I locked it," he screamed. "David." Evelyn shouted, trying to calm him down. He convulsed on the bed, thrashing against the restraints. "Code blue in 214, she cried into her walkie-talkie. Doctors rushed in. David's heart was racing at an impossible speed. He began yelling over and over again. He's crawling in the dark. Through the walls." It took nearly half an hour and 2 doses of sedatives to stabilize him. Later that night, Evelyn pulled up David's records. Something didn't add up. He'd been nonverbal since the accident. The trauma to his head had left him catatonic for 2 weeks. Yet somehow he'd screamed with clarity and intent. She accessed a note from the ICU nurse. Just before his transfer, David had woken briefly. He'd whispered a single word to her before falling unconscious again. The note said, "Crane." The next night, the vent whispering spread. Nurses in different rooms reported hearing strange sounds. In room 306, a new mother claimed her baby stared at the ceiling and giggled, as if someone was talking to him. In the burn unit, a sedated patient began to hum a tune no one recognized, but it came from a melody someone had once reported hearing during the 1987 fire. A low lullaby-like tune, but wrong. Off-key. Twisted. The hospital's maintenance team was called in to inspect the vents. They didn't find rats, or damage, or even dust. They found scratches. Tiny claw-like marks running along the inside of the ducts, long, thin, and deliberate. Carved into the metal, always repeating the same word. Crane. That night, Evelyn sat alone in the break room. Lights dimmed. Coffee cold. She stared at the ceiling vent above her. And this time, the voice didn't whisper. It laughed. A week after the incident in the vents, a new patient was brought in under unusual circumstances. No ID, no family, no admission papers. He'd been found sitting silently in the hospital chapel, head bowed, hands folded in prayer, though his lips never moved. Security assumed he was a homeless man who'd wandered in. But when they tried to escort him out, he calmly looked up and whispered, "I'm already checked in." He was placed in room 222. Evelyn heard about it during shift change. Curious, she checked the logs. There was no record of a new patient assigned to 222. No digital entry. No files. Not even a name. But the room was marked as occupied on the internal system. She asked Marcus, "Did anyone actually admit him?" He frowned. "I don't think so. I thought you did." They decided to check in on the man together. Room 222 was dark. The blinds were drawn, the light overhead flickering slightly. The man sat on the bed in a hospital gown, staring at the floor. He didn't look injured. Didn't seem sick. His skin was pale, almost grayish. His eyes were unfocused. "Sir?" Evelyn said softly. "Can you tell us your name?" The man slowly raised his head. "I already told you," he said. "But none of you listen." Evelyn stepped closer. "Told us what?" "That I was the first." "The first what?" His lips curled into a smile that chilled her to the bone. "The first one he wore." Marcus stiffened. "Who?" The man didn't answer. He reached to the small bedside table and picked up a piece of paper that hadn't been there earlier. He handed it to Evelyn. On the paper was a drawing. Rough, childlike, but unmistakable. A tall figure with a hollow face. No features, just a dark mouth stretched open and empty eyes. Around the figure were vents, mirrors, and a wall of fire. Underneath, in bold black letters, Krane. Before either of them could respond, the man's nose began to bleed. He fell back onto the bed, convulsing. Evelyn rushed to his side, but he was gone within seconds. No pulse. No breath. They called the crash team, began CPR, brought in a defibrillator. But he was already cold. When the team arrived, they stared in confusion. "There's no patient assigned here," the lead nurse said. "Are you sure this isn't some prank?" Evelyn handed over the paper. But the drawing was gone. Only a blank sheet remained. Security footage was pulled from the hallway outside room 222. It showed Evelyn and Marcus entering the room. But no one was seen going in before them. And no one was seen in the bed. To outside eyes, the room was empty the entire time. Later, Evelyn checked the hospital archives again. In a folder labeled Staff Incidents, 1987, she found a report about a patient who died mysteriously in the chapel weeks before the fire. He had no ID. He had drawn similar pictures on the chapel walls using his own blood. They'd removed him and placed him in room 222. Back then it had a different name. It was part of Wing C. The next morning, the digital hospital system glitched. Room 222 had been auto-renamed. Now read, "Patient, Crane, status, waiting." Evelyn shut her monitor, heart racing. Because below that, under next to be seen, it listed, "Assigned staff, Isha, night shift." The nightmares had started again. Evelyn found herself walking the halls of the hospital in her sleep, waking up standing in front of Wing C's sealed door, barefoot, holding her ID card in her trembling hand. She didn't remember getting there. Didn't remember unlocking the door. Each time, she returned to her bed with a deep scratch across her shoulder blade. Not a wound. A mark. In the break room, she confided in Marcus. "I think he's trying to wear me now," she said quietly. Marcus didn't laugh this time. He looked around, lowered his voice. "You know what I heard? About one of the nurses who died in the fire." Evelyn's heart skipped. "Go on." "She didn't die in the fire." "Not exactly. Her name was Marlene. She was in Wing C the night it started. But they never found her body. Only a patch of burnt cloth and a name tag." "What happened to her?" He hesitated. "People say she still roams Wing C. But here's the thing, they say she wasn't burned by the fire. She set herself on fire." Evelyn swallowed. Why would she do that? To escape him. Later that night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She returned to the hospital's basement archives, far below the working floors. Few ever came here anymore. The smell of mildew and rotting paper was thick, and the flickering bulb overhead buzzed like an angry wasp. She found a file labeled, Marlene Dorsey, Incident Report, 1987. Dorsey. The same last name as the elderly patient in room 309. She opened the folder. Inside were yellowed pages and photographs of a young nurse, smiling warm eyes. Not much older than Evelyn. The report said Marlene had begun exhibiting erratic behavior after being assigned to Wing C. Delusions, hallucinations, claims that her reflection moved when she didn't, that the vents were breathing. She said she was being called to room C13, over and over. No one believed her. They called it burnout. Then one night she walked into room C13 carrying a bottle of ethanol, and locked the door behind her. When security forced the door open, the room was on fire, and Marlene was gone. Only a blackened nurse cap and half of her name tag were left. Evelyn leaned back, shaken. As she placed the folder down, a gust of cold air blew through the archive, even though the air was still. And then she smelled it. Burned cloth. Singed hair. She turned. In the far end of the archive hallway stood a nurse. Face charred. Eyes burned white. Skin hanging in melted ribbons from her arms, her legs, her face. And in her hand, a mirror. Evelyn didn't move. The burned nurse lifted the mirror and pointed it at Evelyn. The reflection that stared back wasn't hers. It was Crane, grinning, whispering, "You're next." The lights burst. Evelyn screamed. When the backup generator kicked in and the lights returned, she was alone. But on the floor, lying at her feet, was half of a name tag. Marlene. The other half, still missing. Until Evelyn returned to her locker the next day. Taped to the inside door was the other half, with one word written in ashes. Help. It started with a flicker. The fluorescent lights above the nurse's station buzzed louder than usual, pulsing like a heartbeat. Evelyn stood frozen, a file in her hand, her eyes locked on the monitor that had just glitched. Every screen in the station went black. Phones died. Computers froze. Emergency lights didn't come on. Total silence. Total darkness. The hospital had never gone fully dark before. Not even during storms. There were fail-safes, backups, redundant systems. But this time, nothing. Marcus. Evelyn called out. No answer. She pulled out her phone. Dead. Not low battery, dead. The screen didn't even flicker. Like something had drained it entirely. She stood slowly, heart pounding. The hallway outside was cloaked in shadow, but she could hear the soft wheeling of something distant. A gurney. Moving. Slowly. Then came the sound of breathing. Heavy. Uneven. Coming from behind her. She spun around. No one. But the temperature had dropped. Her breath was visible in the air. A mist formed in front of her lips with every exhale. She reached for the flashlight in the drawer. Nothing. Even the battery-powered devices were dead. A crash echoed from the far end of the hallway. Then came the whispers. Everywhere. From the vents, from behind doors, from the floor beneath her feet. Layered voices overlapping. And one of them was her own. He's inside me. I'm inside him. There is no difference. Evelyn backed away slowly. Her foot touched something soft. A hand. She screamed and turned the light of her penlight, barely glowing, to see Marcus slumped on the floor. His eyes were open but unmoving. His lips trembled as he whispered. He's cutting the power so he can move. What do you mean? Marcus, get up. But he only repeated, he's cutting the power so he can move. From behind her, a gurney rolled past on its own. On it, a body bag. Half zipped. The zipper moved, slowly, down. Evelyn ran. Every hallway she turned down was unfamiliar. It was like the hospital had rearranged itself. Corridors twisted into each other. Signs on the walls no longer made sense. One said OB ward in a hallway leading to the morgue. Then she heard it. Footsteps. Not rushed. Not slow. Just steady. Deliberate. Following. She turned and saw him. Crane. Finally in full form. Not a ghost. Not a hallucination. A man-shaped thing of smoke and ash. His mouth stretched open wider than any human jaw should go. Hands too long dragging across the floor. And where his eyes should have been, two burning red points of light. She ran faster, ducking into a supply closet and locking the door. Her flashlight flickered. She could hear him breathing just outside. And then, silence. Until a voice whispered through the crack beneath the door. "The lights aren't coming back on, until you let me in." Suddenly, the bulb in the closet burst. Glass rained down. Evelyn pressed her back to the shelves, holding her breath. When she opened her eyes, written on the inside of the door in fresh blood were 3 words. One of US. The lights returned an hour later. The hospital systems came back online. Staff who'd passed out were confused but alive. Evelyn emerged from the closet shaking, covered in dust. Marcus had no memory of what happened. Security footage showed only one thing during the blackout. The entire hospital frozen. Except room 309's door, which opened, and stayed open. Even now, it never fully shuts. After the blackout, no one dared speak about what had happened. The official report blamed a massive electromagnetic surge. But no one could explain the whispered voices, or why all the clocks had stopped at 3:13 a.m. and resumed on their own exactly 13 minutes later. 13. It kept showing up. In the reports. In patient files. In the death toll from the 1987 fire, 13 confirmed, 1 missing. In Evelyn's dreams. And always tied to the same location, room C13. Officially, C13 didn't exist anymore. It had been sealed after the fire. But the digital blueprints still listed it deep within Wing C, even though the hallway leading to it had been collapsed. Or so they said. Evelyn needed to know the truth. She snuck into Wing C during her night shift, pushing through the plastic tarps and forgotten storage carts. The air smelled of mold and smoke, and the further she went, the more the hospital seemed to decay. Paint peeled off the walls. Tiles were cracked. The lights above flickered like dying stars. And somewhere in the distance, a lullaby played from a broken speaker. It was that same distorted melody from earlier encounters. She reached the end of the corridor and found it. Room C13. The number had been scorched off, but she could feel it. A coldness that went beyond physical. Like time had paused around the doorframe. She touched the handle, it wasn't locked. Inside the room was intact. Too intact. Untouched by time or fire. Clean white bed sheets. A single steel chair. A mirror hanging on the wall. But no dust. No ash. No signs that anyone had ever sealed it. She stepped inside. And the door closed behind her. Not slammed. Just gently shut. The mirror began to ripple like water. Evelyn walked toward it, her reflection blurring. Her face stretched unnaturally as if the mirror were trying to swallow it. Then the lights above turned red. And the whispers returned. "You've finally come home." Evelyn turned around. On the bed sat a boy. About 8 years old. Eyes black. Skin pale. He looked straight at her. "I burned for them," he said calmly. "They said I was sick. That I wasn't right. That I needed to be locked away." "Who are you?" Evelyn whispered. His head tilted. "I was the one they forgot. Until I became the one they couldn't." He reached out and touched her arm. His skin was ice cold. "You brought me back," he said. "You opened every door they tried to keep shut. You let me into the vents, into the mines, into the systems." Evelyn tried to pull away, but her legs wouldn't move. "You wear her name," he hissed. "The nurse who tried to stop me. She failed. You will too." The lights cut out. And in the darkness, a scream that didn't sound human echoed from the mirror. Evelyn felt something being placed into her pocket. Then silence. When she woke, she was lying outside room C13's door. It was sealed again. Her ID badge was gone. In her pocket was an old rusted name tag. Red. Dorsey M. But beneath that, scratched in by a thin sharp object, was one more name. Isha, next. The night after she found herself outside room C13, Evelyn tried to convince herself it had been a hallucination. A trauma response, maybe. Stress-induced psychosis. Lack of sleep. But something had changed. Mirrors began to move when she passed. Not her reflection, the mirrors themselves. They trembled slightly even in sealed rooms. In the staff bathroom, she'd caught her reflection smiling a full second after she stopped. And then came the calls. 3 times in one night, she was paged to Ward M, the old mirror therapy ward on the East Wing. It had been closed for renovations years ago. Now it was just used for storage. Each call came from a different extension. But when she picked up the line, all she heard was her own voice whispering, "Don't come." Naturally she did. Ward M was quiet. Too quiet. Her footsteps echoed down the corridor. The hallway lights flickered with static, casting eerie double shadows that danced along the walls. When she reached the ward doors, she found them slightly ajar. Inside were rows of old hospital beds, each one positioned to face a mirror. Large, full-body mirrors on wheels streaked with age. She stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind her. Every mirror instantly lit up, glowing faintly from within, though no lights had been turned on. And in every mirror, Evelyn saw something different. Not just reflections, versions of herself. In one mirror, her skin was gray and lifeless, her eyes blackened. In another, she was wearing a nurse's cap, with her mouth sewn shut. In yet another, she was standing behind herself, watching. One mirror stood out, larger than the rest, framed in rusted iron and cracked through the center. Her reflection in it was smiling even as she wasn't. Then the reflection reached out, pressed both hands against the glass, and began to push. Evelyn backed away, but the glass didn't break. Instead, her reflection stepped out. She fell to the floor in terror. The copy stood above her, wearing her uniform, her face, but wrong. The smile too wide, the eyes too sharp. Then it spoke in her voice. "You're tired? Let me take this shift." Evelyn scrambled backward as the doppelganger tilted its head, then turned and walked calmly out of the ward. The mirrors all went dark. When she reached the hallway, no one was there. No alarm. No sound. But as she passed the break room, she saw herself, sitting inside, chatting casually with another nurse, sipping coffee. Her reflection. Living her shift. Evelyn turned and ran to Marcus. He looked at her strangely. "Didn't you just walk by?" he asked. "You waved at me like 2 minutes ago." She grabbed his arm. "That wasn't me." He frowned. They both turned toward the security monitor. In real-time footage, Nurse Evelyn was making rounds, laughing with staff, updating charts. But Evelyn was standing right there, heart racing, pale, cold. "I'm not in there," she whispered. Marcus leaned closer to the screen, then paused. "Look at her reflection," he said slowly. In the monitor, Nurse Evelyn passed by a window, and her reflection paused, turned, looked directly at the camera, and winked. Marcus stepped back. "I think you've been replaced." Evelyn nodded slowly. "No," she said, voice shaking. "Not replaced." She stared down the hallway toward where her double had gone. "I think she's trying to become me." Evelyn no longer trusted her own reflection. She avoided mirrors, windows, even polished metal surfaces. Anything that could mimic her movements felt unsafe. Too real. Too close to failing. The doppelganger, her twisted double, had started taking over her rounds. Colleagues claimed to see her in 2 places at once. One, Evelyn gave meds in the ICU. The other was seen eating in the break room at the exact same time. One night, Nurse Preety swore she had a full conversation with Evelyn about patient updates. But Evelyn had been asleep in the staff room for over an hour. That night, Evelyn stayed late to investigate. She needed proof. She asked Marcus to help her access the hospital's off-network surveillance backups. These were stored on old drives separate from the main system, untouched by the recent power failures. What they found chilled them both. Footage from 3:13 a.m., exactly 13 nights in a row, showed Evelyn leaving her room and walking into the abandoned psychiatric wing. The same wing sealed after the 1987 fire. But she didn't remember any of it. Evelyn's eyes in the footage looked glassy, her movements robotic. She walked without urgency, hands limp at her sides, like she was being puppet. Even worse, after she passed a certain point in the hallway, the camera glitched, and her shadow kept walking. Even after her body had stopped, Marcus tried to laugh it off. "It's a trick of the light," he said, but his voice shook. Evelyn looked him dead in the eyes. "Something is walking for me, and I don't know how to stop it." The next day, Evelyn received a note in her locker. It wasn't written in pen. It was burned into the paper. "Third shift is yours now. Sleep well." That night, Evelyn barricaded herself in the staff lounge and locked the door. She swallowed 3 melatonin tablets, determined to stay asleep and inside. No more wandering. But sometime past midnight, she woke up. Not in the lounge. Not in her bed. She was standing in room 309. The air was thick. The lights above flickered faintly red. And there, sitting upright in bed, was the elderly man from before, Mr. Dorsey. But something was different. His body was still. Mouth agape. Eyes wide open. Dead. And in the reflection of the window beside his bed, Evelyn saw herself. Smiling. But she wasn't smiling. She stepped backward. The reflection didn't move. It kept grinning. Then it raised a hand and pointed to the heart monitor. Evelyn followed the gesture. And there it was. A flat line. The machine was unplugged. And on the screen, instead of patient vitals, it read in static-filled letters. Welcome to Shift 3. Suddenly, an overhead page echoed through the hospital. Nurse Evelyn Shaw to the psychiatric wing. Immediate assistance required. Her hands trembled. The voice on the speaker? It was her own. Evelyn's breath came in shallow bursts as she stood frozen in room 309. The announcement repeated overhead, her voice calling herself to the psychiatric wing. Each word echoed like a command written in her bones. She didn't want to go. But her feet began to move anyway. Through the hallways. Past sleeping patients and flickering emergency lights. Drawn. Like something was pulling her consciousness by threads. She arrived at the east hallway, the one sealed off after the fire. The entrance was supposed to be blocked by thick metal shutters and reinforced brick. But tonight they were gone. In their place stood a single wooden door. Rotten. Its paint flaking, hinges rusted and carved into the grain, so deep it looked like it bled, was a number, 000. There had never been a room 000. This door had never been on any map. And yet, she knew it had always been there. Evelyn reached for the handle. It felt warm. Alive. The door opened with a sound like a sigh, revealing a spiral staircase that led downward into impossible darkness. She hesitated only for a second before descending. With every step, the hospital behind her seemed to stretch farther away. The air became thicker, damp, almost gelatinous. A low hum vibrated in her teeth. At the base of the stairs, she entered what looked like a mirror of the hospital, but inverted, walls stained with what looked like blood and ash, lights hanging by wires for poles dragging themselves across the floor. This was the origin, the source of it all. The forgotten wing buried not by architecture, but by intention. She passed patient rooms filled with whispering shadows. One room had a crib where a skeletal infant stared at her with glowing red eyes. Another had nurses with stitched faces rocking back and forth, holding invisible patients. Finally she found it. A locked cell. On the door, a charred plaque barely readable under the grime. Patient 000K. Crane. Inside, a man sat hunched over back to the door. Bell. Shaking. But when Evelyn stepped closer, he spoke without turning. You keep visiting me in your sleep, Evelyn. Now you've come awake. That means I'm ready. She opened the door. He turned around. His face was hers. Except gaunt, hollow, lips sewn into a grin. The third shift never ends, he whispered. Not until you choose. Suddenly, the room burst into crimson light. Reflections appeared in midair, floating mirrors, each showing a version of Evelyn. One was a nurse. One was a patient. One was strapped to a bed. One was holding a scalpel. One was covered in blood. Crane stepped back into the shadows, whispering, "Only one of you gets to leave." Then came the scream. It didn't come from Evelyn. It came from one of the mirrors. The reflections began to step forward, out of the glass, solidifying. A dozen Evelyns, and all of them looked angry, trapped, hungry. They rushed toward her at once. Evelyn ran, heart thundering, dodging grasping hands, tearing past shifting corridors, mirrors shattering around her. She burst through the stairwell and slammed the wooden door shut behind her, now seared with her name. Evelyn Shaw, room 000. She made it back to the regular hospital. But nothing felt normal anymore. The staff looked slightly off. Some smiled too much. Some blinked too slowly. Some had reflections that didn't move. And now, whenever Evelyn walks by a mirror, she doesn't see herself. She sees the door, waiting to open again. The day after she escaped room 000, Evelyn returned to the hospital determined to find records. Proof. A trail. Anything that explained who, or what, Crane really was. She didn't trust the staff anymore. Some of them weren't right. They moved in strange rhythms, answered questions with blank stares, and never seemed to blink. So she went straight to the hospital archives. The file room was 3 floors below ground. Cold, musty, and quiet. She had to use a flashlight. The overhead lights had long since given up. Thousands of patient files were stacked on rusting metal shelves. Yellowed folders marked with tags dating back decades. She began with the fire. March 13, 1987. The official report said the blaze started in the psychiatric wing due to faulty wiring. 13 dead. One body never recovered. But the incident log told a different story. Fire believed to have originated in isolation room 13C. Witnesses claimed to see figures in the smoke. All bodies recovered except patient 000, Kevin Crane. Cell was sealed. No signs of escape. No remains found. Crane. There he was. A name buried under layers of redacted ink. His file was thin. Pages missing. But one sheet remained. Patient exhibits unnatural influence over electrical devices. Staff report vivid hallucinations when near the subject. Mirrors in the room repeatedly crack without cause. Subject claims to have traveled through reflections. Evelyn's hands trembled. There was a photo stapled to the back. It was a grainy image but unmistakable. The boy she'd seen in room C13. Same pale skin. Same black eyes. Except, in the photo he wasn't alone. Standing beside him, half-faded like a ghost, was a nurse with a name tag barely visible. Dorcium. The same name carved into the rusted tag that had appeared in Evelyn's pocket. She sat back, heart pounding, when something shifted in the room. Papers began fluttering off the shelves. A low hum vibrated from the walls. And then, from the corner of the archive, a drawer slid open on its own. Inside was a file folder, scorched black along the edges. It was unmarked. Evelyn opened it, and her name was inside. Shaw Evelyn. The first page was a detailed report of her death. Deceased, March 13, 2025, approximate 3:13 a.m. Cause, self-inflicted wounds. Psychiatric disturbance. Witnesses claim last words were, "I see myself watching." She dropped the file. "No," she whispered. "I'm alive. I'm still here." Behind her, something whispered, "You're not. You just haven't accepted it yet." She turned. Nothing. But the fluorescent bulbs above began to flicker. And then, for a brief moment, they went out. In that second of pitch black, a flash of a reflection. Dozens of Evelyns, all standing around her. Each one whispering, "Only one can stay." When the lights came back on, the archive was silent again. But the burned file remained. And on the last page, a handwritten note. "Third shift complete. Transfer pending." She pocketed the folder and ran back to the surface. But when she entered the staff lounge, everyone froze. Every head turned. They were all smiling. In perfect, mirror-like unison. And then in one voice they said, "Welcome back, Evelyn. It's time to finish what you started." The staff lounge was filled with smiling faces. Too still. Too synchronized. Evelyn froze in the doorway as every nurse, orderly, and technician turned to face her. Their lips curled upward in the exact same arc, eyes gleaming with unnatural light. They weren't blinking. Not one of them. "Welcome back, Evelyn," they said again. "It's time." She backed away slowly, heart thudding so loud it echoed in her ears. One of the nurses stepped forward. A face she knew, Nurse Rivera. Usually warm, kind. But something in her was gone. "Where are the real nurses?" Evelyn demanded. Rivera tilted her head, the smile never faltering. "We are the real nurses. We've simply been repurposed." Evelyn bolted down the hallway, nearly slipping on the tile. Her breath caught in her throat as lights exploded above her, one by one, casting brief flashes of red and shadow. The hospital was transforming around her. Walls bled. Mirrors pulsed like heartbeats. And then she heard the footsteps, many of them behind her, but with a rhythm that didn't match human movement. Like dragging bones. Clicking teeth. She hid inside the linen supply closet, clutching the burned folder to her chest. Inside she found an old radio. It crackled to life. A child's voice came through. "Evelyn, are you awake yet?" Crane. The voice of the patient that never died. "Why me?" she hissed at the radio. "What do you want?" Static. Then. "You open the mirror. Now you keep it open. That's your job." Suddenly, a soft shuffling sound behind her. She turned and saw a pair of feet hanging just above the floor. A nurse, suspended in the corner of the closet by invisible wires, her eyes gouged out, her mouth stretched open in a frozen scream. Not dead. Watching. Evelyn screamed and burst out of the closet, sprinting toward the east wing. She passed Marcus in the hallway. He looked at her with pain in his eyes. "They're copying everyone," he whispered. "They took my brother last night. I tried to lock him in the freezer. He kept talking in my voice." "Where's Crane?" Evelyn shouted. He pointed toward the elevators. "They've opened the sublevel. Basement 4. It's not on the schematics, but it's real." Evelyn grabbed his arm. "You're real, right?" He nodded slowly. "I don't know how much longer I will be." They descended together. The elevator doors rattled and groaned as they passed floors that didn't exist. Basement 3, Basement 3, Level 0. Then silence. And the doors opened. Basement 4 was dark. The walls were covered in old patient charts nailed like wallpaper. Every page bore the same signature. K. Crane. As they moved down the corridor, Evelyn saw dozens of hospital beds, each holding a patient that looked like someone from her life. Her grandmother. Her high school teacher. Even herself, hooked up to 4 eyes darting behind closed lids. "Dreamers," Marcus whispered. "He feeds on them. Keeps them in a sleep where he controls everything." Suddenly a siren blared. The lights turned deep red. And down the hallway the watchers emerged. Tall, faceless figures in white hospital gowns, dragging broken mirrors chained to their wrists. They didn't walk, they glided, silently. And they were coming. Marcus pulled Evelyn into a side room. Inside was an operating table. And on it, Crane. Not the child. Not the man. Something in between. His body was suspended midair, held by mirror fragments circling like satellites. His face flickered constantly, child, nurse, patient, her own. "You finally came back," he rasped. Evelyn stepped forward. "What are you?" Crane opened his eyes. "I'm what the hospital made when it forgot how to heal." Then the mirrors shattered. And Evelyn screamed. The mirrors around Crane exploded into the air, their shards floating like frozen glass raindrops, suspended by an unseen force. Evelyn shielded her eyes. Marcus screamed beside her, clutching his head. Blood trickled from his ears. Crane hovered above the operating table, body twitching as if he were being electrocuted by memories. "They buried me here," he hissed, voice fractured like radio static. "Not my body. Me. The idea of me." Evelyn forced herself to look up. Crane's face had shifted again. It was now her father's. "You forgot the rules, Evelyn. You opened the mirror. You walked the third shift. You broke the fracture protocol." "What is that?" she demanded. "Tell me how to stop this." The glass surrounding him pulsed, spinning faster. Reflections inside the shards showed herself, crying, laughing, dying, healing, all at once. Crane didn't answer. But the walls of the room began to crack. Out poured dozens of arms, some human, others skeletal, many clawed. They reached for Evelyn, but the moment they touched her, they recoiled. Screamed. She looked down. The burned folder in her hand had begun to glow. Its pages flipped on their own, stopping on a torn, handwritten sheet. At the top it read, "Fracture Protocol, Emergency Containment Directive." Below, instructions written in trembling pen. "If subject begins to replicate, see, Crane-type anomaly, activate mirror lockdown. All reflections must be neutralized. Dreamers must be severed. Third shift must be closed." It continued, "Final measure, mirror heart transfer. Must be willingly accepted by original reflection. Requires full identity surrender." Evelyn's heart dropped. "They want me to take his place," she whispered. "They want me to become the new anchor." Marcus, pale and bleeding, leaned against the wall. "If you don't, he keeps spreading. Everyone will be him eventually." She looked at Crane, now grinning with her own face. 1,000 Evelyns stared back at her from the shards. Crying, screaming, pleading. "You're the only one that still resists," Crane said. "The others, they gave up. Chose peace. You keep fighting. That's why you're perfect." Evelyn stepped forward. She opened the file and placed her palm on the glowing text. The hospital shook. The watchers screamed in the floors above. Lights burst. Reflections rippled. And then, silence. Crane hovered closer, eyes wide. "You're accepting it?" Evelyn nodded once. "If I go in, they go free." Crane hesitated. "They might not want to wake up." Evelyn stared straight into her reflection. One shard showing her as a child, clutching a nurse's hand. Another shard showed her dead, eyes open and blank. "I don't care," she said. "They deserve the choice." Then she whispered the final words written in the folder. "I submit. I see myself." I closed the mirror. Light burst from every surface. The mirrors imploded inward. Crane screamed, no longer angry but relieved. Finally, he whispered. The last thing Evelyn saw was the operating table falling away, her reflection swallowing her whole. When she woke up, she was standing in the hospital lobby. Plain, bright daylight pouring through the windows. Staff bustled around, smiling naturally. A doctor passed by and nodded warmly. "Morning, Nurse Shaw. How was your night?" Evelyn blinked. "Quiet." But as she turned toward the mirror near the nurse's station, it was covered with a sheet. And behind the sheet something moved. Very slightly. Smiling. Days passed. Or at least Evelyn thought they did. The hospital looked normal again. Sterile white lights, clean hallways, orderly staff. No more flickering bulbs, no more whispers in the vents. Everything moved with clinical calm. But the mirror behind the nurse's station stayed covered. And Evelyn couldn't stop thinking about it. Each time she passed it, she swore she heard something faint, like fingers tapping on glass from the other side. 3 slow taps. Then silence. Then 3 more. Marcus had disappeared. No one remembered him. When Evelyn asked around, her co-workers gave puzzled looks. "Marcus? Sorry, we don't have a nurse by that name." But she found a note in her locker. Scrawled in red ink. "They only forget what they're told to forget. Don't look in the mirror." That night she stayed late. After the last shift ended, she stood alone before the shrouded mirror. Her reflection tugged at her from behind the thin sheet, like a heartbeat waiting to be acknowledged. She gripped the edge of the cloth, then pulled. The mirror was cracked but intact. Her reflection stared back. She reached out. And her reflection didn't. Just smiled. Evelyn stumbled backward, pulse rising. The lights above her flickered. Not in stuttering bursts like before, but in perfect rhythm. 3 flashes, then dark. And from the mirror, her own voice spoke. "You left me in there." Evelyn's mouth went dry. I took your place. That was the deal." The reflection nodded slowly. "You closed the mirror. But not all of it. One piece stayed open." Behind her, she heard a soft scratching sound. She turned, and the hospital was gone. Instead, she stood in a dim hallway filled with doors. Each door bore a name. Some familiar. Some hers. The lights here were candles floating mid-air. She wasn't dreaming. Not exactly. But not awake either. She was in the in-between. Where reflections waited. A nurse approached, her own face again but older, eyes hollow. She whispered, "He's still here. Crane never left." Evelyn stepped forward. "Where is he?" The reflection pointed to the last door on the left. It flickered with shifting titles. Patient, K. Crane. Doctor, Shaw. Subject, open. Evelyn opened it. Inside was a room made entirely of glass. And in the center, a mirror version of herself, still strapped to the operating table, eyes wide open, breathing steadily. She hadn't fully crossed over. Not yet. Crane sat beside her, no longer twisted or childlike. He looked like a normal man now. Tired. Set. "You tried," he said. "But the mirror you closed was only one of many." Evelyn stared. "How do I shut the rest?" Crane looked up, and for the first time, there was no malice in his eyes. "By making peace with your reflection. All of them." He raised a hand, and suddenly, around the glass room, hundreds of mirrors ignited with light. Each one showed a different version of Evelyn. The liar. The caregiver. The child. The victim. The monster. "I can't," she said. "There's too many." Crane gave a small smile. "Then start with one." He motioned to the strapped version of herself on the table. "You haven't forgiven her yet." Evelyn stepped forward, heartbreaking. The woman on the table looked back at her with nothing but guilt. For failing her patience. For letting Marcus fall. For letting Crane inside. Evelyn reached out and touched her hand. And for the first time the glass warmed. Then cracked. One mirror down. Dozens to go. The room began to tremble again. Crane stood. "You better go. They'll notice you're gone." Evelyn turned toward the door. But before she left, she looked back at Crane. "Why help me?" He looked toward a mirror where his reflection was still a child, lost and screaming. "Because I want to go home too." Back in the hospital, Evelyn awoke at her desk, a headache pounding behind her eyes. The mirror was covered once more. But this time, it was quiet. For now. Evelyn began her plan in secret. By day, she worked the regular shifts, checking vitals, logging medication, smiling at patients who somehow looked a little too perfect sometimes. But by night, she returned to the in-between. She didn't sleep anymore. Sleep meant slipping back into the mirrors. Instead, she memorized every crack in the mirror ward's glass doors, every flicker of candlelight in that dream hospital beneath the real one. Each night she returned to that corridor of doors. Each door held a version of herself, and she was determined to face them all. The second reflection was the angry one, Evelyn in a blood-soaked nurse's uniform, screaming at an unseen patient. She was the version who had once let a man die because she didn't trust herself to perform a code blue. "You killed him," the reflection spat. "I was scared." "That's not an excuse. It's the truth." The moment Evelyn said it, her reflection stopped. Her face softened. The mirror cracked. One more down. The third was the coward, a version of Evelyn hiding under a hospital bed while Crane's influence spread, too afraid to sound the alarm. "I ran," the reflection said. "I know. I let them take everyone. You weren't strong enough then. But you are now." Crack. She kept going. The fourth reflection refused to speak. She only wept, curled up in a hospital closet, clutching the scorched patient file that started it all. Evelyn sat beside her and simply listened. When the reflection finally looked up, eyes wide and shimmering, Evelyn said, "I forgive you." The mirror shattered like ice. Every time she faced one, the hospital changed just a little. Less humming in the vents. Fewer watchers in her peripheral vision. Even the covered mirror near the nurse's station seemed quieter. But Crane hadn't visited again. Not in days. She began to worry. One night, when Evelyn stepped into the in-between, she found the hallway burning. The doors were melting into black glass. The candles were flickering out one by one. And standing at the far end of the corridor, not Crane, but taller, hollow-eyed, pale as death, wearing her scrubs only soaked in shadow. Her reflection, the one that had smiled from the mirror long ago. The mirror Evelyn. "You've been closing doors," the mirror Evelyn said, voice echoing like 1,000 glass chimes. "Yes. That's not how this ends." Evelyn stepped forward. "It ends with me. All of me." The mirror Evelyn snarled, and behind her, dozens of cracked reflections began to stir. Ones Evelyn hadn't reached yet. The liar. The failure. The jealous. The cruel. "You think forgiveness is enough?" the mirror said. "You think healing means erasing what you did?" Evelyn clenched her fists. "No. Healing means carrying it and choosing to live anyway." Then the shadows lunged. Evelyn ran. She darted through the burning ward, doors exploding behind her, ghosts of her past howling in rage. But she wasn't afraid anymore. Not of them. Not of herself. She ran toward the final door, the one she had never dared to open. Her childhood room. She reached for the handle, even as fire licked her back and cracked glass pierced her arms. Inside was a bed. A small hand-drawn poster. A mirror above a dresser. And a girl maybe 9 years old, sitting and watching. The original Evelyn. Not a nurse. Not a fighter. Just a girl who had once seen her mother die in this hospital and decided she would never be powerless again. Evelyn knelt before her. "I forgot you," she whispered. The little girl smiled, reached up, and placed her hand on Evelyn's chest. Light bloomed. Not white. Warm. And outside the door, the burning stopped. One by one, the mirrors stopped screaming. The mirror Evelyn shrieked, writhing, backing away as the reflection in every shard turned away from her. Refused to follow. Refused to obey. And then, the mirror Evelyn cracked. Evelyn woke up on the hospital roof just as the sun rose. She could hear birds. Real ones. And in her pocket was a single shard of glass, no longer cold but pulsing softly with warmth. One more night. One final reflection. Evelyn stood in front of the mirror that had started it all. It was no longer covered. No longer humming. Just there. It showed her reflection clearly now. No flickers, no delays, no trickery. Just her. One. Older. Alive. But something in her chest stirred. That familiar pull. That weight. She still hadn't faced the last one. The version of herself that wanted to stay in the mirror. The version who found comfort in forgetting. She stepped into the in-between one final time. The hallway of doors was quiet now, clean, calm, glowing faintly like it was bathed in early morning light. No smoke. No screams. But at the end stood one last door. Unmarked. It didn't flicker. It waited. Evelyn opened it slowly. Inside there was no hospital. No mirrors. Just an empty field of tall grass under twilight. And in the middle, a picnic blanket. 2 cups of tea. A woman sitting cross-legged. Herself. But peaceful. Serene. Not a reflection of pain or fear or regret. Just Evelyn resting. She looked up and smiled. "You made it." Evelyn stepped forward slowly. "Who are you?" I'm the version of you that didn't try to fight, the reflection said. The one who let go. Gave up. You seem happy. I am. Because I accepted the truth. That sometimes survival means surrender. That not every battle must be fought with fire. Evelyn sat across from her. But if I hadn't fought, I'd be gone. Maybe. Or maybe you'd be here. With me. Safe. A silence passed between them. The kind that feels heavy but gentle. The reflection poured tea into the cups. I didn't want to be forgotten, she said. None of us did. That's why we screamed. Evelyn looked down. I didn't forget. I just couldn't face all of you at once. Her reflection reached over and took her hand. And you did anyway. That's why we're whole again. The field began to shimmer, slowly turning to glass around them. Not cold, not sharp, but clear. So, you're not broken anymore, the reflection said. You never were. You just needed to see yourself. The ground beneath them lifted like a rising platform, taking Evelyn back up through the layers of dreams, through memories, through pain and healing and darkness and light. She passed the other versions of herself on the way up. Each one nodded, smiled. Some wept. Some laughed. And then she woke. She was in the hospital garden. Real sunlight on her skin. Real wind through her hair. A nurse walked past and waved. A patient laughed with a visitor under a tree. Everything looked normal. Alive. She checked her pocket. The shard of mirror was gone. In its place, a folded note. Written in her own handwriting. You've closed the mirror. But remember, reflection is not the enemy. It is the doorway. And below it, one final line, perhaps written by someone else. Thank you for seeing me. K. Later that night, Evelyn walked through the now empty psychiatric wing. Room 313 had been cleaned out. No trace of Crane. No burn marks. No files. But before she left, she paused by the far wall. A single mirror remained, small, circular, unbroken. She stared at her reflection. And this time, it waved. Not in warning, but in peace. Evelyn smiled, and waved back. Then she turned out the light, and walked away. Evelyn thought it was over. The mirrors were quiet. The voices silenced. Her own soul, once splintered into 100 shards, felt stitched together again. But the hospital hadn't forgotten. It never does. She began noticing things in the corners. Faint echoes of laughter in sterile rooms with no one inside. A child's drawing, one she knew she had burned, appeared on the staff bulletin board, tacked in place as if it had always been there. And then one evening she found an old photograph in the archives. The hospital had been rebuilt many times, but the original wing, once a psychiatric facility, dated back nearly 100 years. The photo was sepia-toned and faded, showing a group of doctors in long coats. But there, standing in the back row, was a boy. Smiling. His eyes blank. Crane. She flipped the photo over. A neat script. Founding staff, Ward 13, St. Maro Asylum, 1921. There was no mention of Crane in the records. No birth certificate. No death. No discharge. Just that photo. Evelyn dug deeper. Spent her nights in dusty storage rooms and forgotten libraries. What she found made her blood run cold. St. Maro wasn't just a hospital. It had been an experiment. In the early 1900s, a controversial doctor, Dr. Elias Crane, believed that mental illness could be mirrored and projected outward. He theorized that if a patient could confront a physical manifestation of their trauma, essentially a living reflection, they could overcome it. They built mirrored rooms, trained patients to speak to themselves. But something went wrong. The reflections didn't fade. They grew, fed on fear. Some patients began to disappear. Others began to change, to mimic their reflections entirely. When the asylum was shut down, the government buried the experiments under the new wing. But the mirrors remained, and so did he. Crane wasn't a patient. He was the creator. He became what he feared, a reflection that never died. Evelyn stepped into the deepest part of the hospital, the original basement, now sealed and long condemned. She broke the lock herself. Inside, the walls were lined with dust-covered mirrors. Some shattered, some pristine, all humming faintly. A presence stirred. Not malevolent, not kind, just ancient. The air felt thick with memory. A figure appeared behind one of the mirrors, tall, cloaked, face hidden. It wasn't Crane, or at least not the boy she remembered. It was a silhouette built from shadows and memory, barely tethered to form. It spoke without sound, its voice inside her mind. Why return? She steadied her breath. To end it? You cannot end a memory, only rewrite it. The mirrors began to glow, each one showing a different part of the hospital. Old wards, silent surgeries, forgotten screams. And in one of them, Evelyn saw herself, 10 years from now, still working, still walking these halls, still searching. She turned to the figure. You feed on trauma, on fear. That's why the hospital keeps suffering. It is not suffering. It is remembering. The shadow stepped back into its mirror, and the glass solidified, but a crack ran down the center. A start. Back upstairs, Evelyn filed her final report. She requested the closure of Ward 13. She suggested tearing out all the remaining mirrors in the old wings. The board approved. The wing would be sealed. But Evelyn knew something the board didn't. The mirrors weren't the disease. They were the symptom. The true hospital, the living memory, was buried beneath the tiles, between the bricks, inside every person who walked its halls. You couldn't burn memory. You could only face it. The hospital stood still beneath the moonlight as if it too was holding its breath. Evelyn sat in her car across the street from the main entrance. The building looked normal. Windows lit on a few floors, night shift nurses chatting by the emergency doors, the faint sound of an ambulance arriving in the distance. Normal. But she knew better. Tonight was her last night. Her transfer had been approved, offered even. A hospital in the countryside. A quiet one. Far from reflective surfaces and haunted basements. She had packed her bags. She had said her goodbyes. But something unfinished pulled at her. One more walk. One more round through the corridors she had bled in, healed in, fought in. The hallways greeted her with silence. The lights buzzed gently overhead like they always had. But every room she passed now felt different. Less hostile. Less haunted. Just tired. She entered Ward 13 one last time. Stripped of mirrors. Empty beds. Clean floors. No whispers. She walked slowly, hand grazing the wall, remembering the faces, of patients who vanished, of nurses who'd gone mad, of reflections who wept in silence. Then a soft sound. Not a scream. A lullaby. From the far end of the corridor. She followed it without fear. The room it led to didn't exist on the blueprint. She checked 100 times. And yet, there it was. A door. Room 0. Inside, a single chair. A mirror hanging above a sink. And a boy sitting with his back to her, humming softly. Crane. But not the smirking shadow. Just a boy. Thin. Pale. Eyes distant. Feet swinging slightly, too small to reach the floor. He turned as she entered. You came back, he said. Evelyn nodded. I always do. He looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen before. Oh, you know what this place is, he said. More than anyone else. She did. The hospital wasn't just haunted. It was alive, formed by grief. It had become a vessel for it. An echo chamber. A mirror of humanity's deepest wounds. And Crane, he had only ever been its voice. Its keeper. Its prisoner. Evelyn approached slowly. What do you want, Crane? His eyes glistened. I want to be forgotten. She blinked. What? I was never meant to stay. I was the pain that held the doors open. The fear that kept the mirror alive. But now, he looked up at her. Now you've changed it. The lullaby faded. Silence again. But memory is stubborn, he whispered. It clings. Even to ghosts like me. Evelyn kneeled beside him. Then did the one thing no one ever had. She held him. Not to exorcise. Not to banish. Just to hold. And for the first time he cried. The room around them began to dissolve. Walls peeling away, ceiling turning into sky, floor into light. The hospital was remembering one last time. Then, forgetting. The room blinked out. And Evelyn stood alone in the empty corridor. Room 0 gone. No humming. No mirrors. Just a hallway. Just a hospital. She walked out with the sunrise on her face. Outside life went on. Visitors arrived. New staff came and went. And no one remembered the boy in the mirror. Except her. And that was enough. Epilogue. Years later, a new intern at the country hospital would find Evelyn's journal tucked between old patient files. It held no names, no dates, just stories. Whispers of reflections. Maps of forgotten rooms. Drawings of cracked mirrors that hummed. And at the very end, a line written in Evelyn's hand. You don't fight the past. You listen to it. And then you let it sleep. And beneath it, the faintest reflection shimmered in the paper. A boy. Smiling. Then gone. Forever.